Hello, my name is Larry Elward, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Store Brands Magazine. I'd like to welcome Brian Rafferty, Global Director of Analytics and Insights for Siegel+Gale, a global brand strategy firm based in New York. Siegel+Gale recently released its 2017 Global Brand Simplicity Index, which the firm believes quantifies the value of brand simplicity. The index surveyed more than 14,000 respondents across 9 countries and found that simplicity has a significant return on investment for a brand as customers pay more for simpler experiences. Brian is going to answer some questions about simplicity as it relates to own brands. Brian, welcome.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
It's good to have you. Brian, your firm believes that simplicity is the ultimate driver of brand loyalty and that consumers are willing to pay more for simpler experiences. Can you elaborate on this as it relates to supermarkets, grocers, mass merchandisers, and other retailers of consumer packaged goods?
Sure. One thing we've seen, so we have consumers rate a whole set of brands across a whole variety of industries, and one we've seen that retail brands, especially grocers and supermarkets, many of them do very well in our index. With Trader Joe's, for example, being in the top 10 in the U.S. So one, they're perceived as, some of them at least, are perceived as being very simple, and then two, in terms of the value of simplicity, what we've seen is, one, that consumers are actually willing to pay more for brands that they perceive deliver simpler experiences, communications, services, products to them, and then two, that they're also more likely to recommend brands that provide simpler experiences. So with both of those, we see really that there is value in simplicity for brands, or that supermarket brands actually derive a lot of their value actually by providing simple experiences. We see Aldi as being the simplest brand globally now for the second year, or actually I think maybe even third year in a row. And I just read about them recently, since they have just recently redesigned their logo. And one of the things they state in the press release related to that is how simplicity has actually been core to their ethos for the last 50 years. So it's not by accident, if you will, that this is where they're ending up. They're doing it in a very calculated and, and determined way.
Mm-hmm. Brian, does simplicity also apply to retailers' own brands, which strive to be noticed among national brands?
Yes, definitely. I think there's been a trend, I think, in packaging and in consumer brands, where many that have stood out or built stronger brands in recent times have been simpler, or at least have taken also a simpler approach to their communications, like Method, for example. And I think retailer brands, store brands, have also gone away from only being copycats to actually creating, if you will, more standalone real brands that have their own identities and that in some ways often leverage design in ways better than the actual product brands that they're competing with. So, for example, Publix, which is another supermarket brand that does well in our index, their store brand is in some ways, one, much simpler than the product brands that it's competing against, but also actually can appear even higher quality and more premium through that simplicity, which I think helps them in making their store brand products in some ways seem more appealing even than the product brands that they're competing against.
Mm-hmm. In the case of private brands, how simple do you get, Brian? What could be too simple?
Sure, I do think that can be too simple, because too simple is when it starts looking generic, if you will. Where it looks like the Acme product, and what that then leads to is people feeling that the product is lesser quality and less appealing. So I think that's what too simple would be. I think it's also, simplicity isn't just about paring down or having a plain package. A lot of simplicity is about making sure that the information hierarchy on a pack and that the portfolio hierarchy, if you will, or meaning the sort of amount of flavors you're offering or the amount of different products within a given category you're offering, is very clear and defined in an easy way. And I think that's what good simplicity is when you're thinking about brands, product brands in general, but especially store brands. It's when it's actually also very clear as to what the portfolio is, and that I think that's where, for example, Trader Joe's does a great job in having that limited amount of choice for any given product. Mm-hmm. And that actually helps in really making it clear to people what they want to buy. They don't have to hesitate or think about it. They sort of can shop their favorites. So I think that's where simplicity is good, and too simple is when you start either giving people not enough choice or you start making it too generic.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Brian, you mentioned Aldi, which I know is the simplest brand in your firm's global index and was for the fourth year in a row. What makes Aldi special when it comes to simplicity of its brands, and how has this impacted the retailer?
Sure. The Aldi, I think, is just a great standard bearer for this idea of simplicity, especially in the retailer space, because they do how actually Siegel+Gale defines simplicity, which is two things. It's being remarkably clear, which is in some way self-explanatory and is how people often think about simplicity. But it's also being unexpectedly fresh. It's providing simplicity in ways that people didn't quite expect. And that's what I think the best brands do, and that's what makes them stand out. And Aldi does that in not just... It's remarkably clear in it when it promises you a deal, it provides a deal. We see in the open ends associated with the brand ratings for them. Over and over again, people saying, I just know that when they're telling me it's going to be the cheapest, it is the cheapest, and I know I'll have it there. So it's a lot, they deliver on their promises. The other thing they do fantastically well is you go to Aldi and you see something on what seems incredibly cheap price that you never expected to find there, such as, they put laptops for $300 during the holidays as, gifts that people can buy and things like that. So they also stay true to that premise, which is don't just give people the expected cheapness, also find ways of delighting people that they don't expect, and that's what makes people loyal to the brand and really want to continue to shop there.
Mm-hmm. Brian, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to address the importance of simplicity with brands. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for having me.
This is Larry Elward with Brian Rafferty, and thanks for listening to this podcast.